The title of this message is Identifying Character Traits. But maybe that's not, it's a title that you need a little qualification on. Identifying quality traits in history that the discovery will help us in understanding things now. And there's a surprising discovery in the history of Israel. It may sound like a little thing, but I want to show that it may give us a key in certain areas. But first, let me give you the backdrop to this historical thing in the history of Israel. The Syrians had invaded Israel with all these war chariots, and King Ahab, one of the prophets, probably from Elijah, said, told him what to do, and God will show you who the real God is by giving you a victory, even though you're outnumbered 4-1. And true enough, they had a great victory. And the Syrian king said, well, it's the hills of Samaria that defeated us. Their God is strong in the hills, but our God is strong on the flat land. Well, you know, God is not going to tolerate that kind of thing. So they met them again with a much bigger army on flat level ground. And God, of course, again gave the victory to Israel. He wasn't going to give it to them because they said God couldn't do it. But in the victory, the enemy retreated and they all got on this big wall. And I'm going to pick it up in 1 Kings 20, verse 30. 1 Kings 20, verse 30. This will be a fairly short message, but I want to get across this one point. But it's a secret in helping us unwind and understanding prophecy. 1 Kings 20, 30, 31. Then a wall fell, and 27,000 of the men who were left, they died when the wall fell. In other words, as they retreated from the Israeli army, they went to a city, and they climbed on the wall, all the Syrian soldiers. We're going to hold them off here, even though everything has gone bad because God had done things to unnerve them. And then the wall just collapsed, and all their soldiers, of course, died when the walls of the city collapsed. Of course, God did that. It might look like it was the weight of the people. No, it was God who did it. And Ben-Hadad fled and went into the inner city in some inner chamber with his main aides. He thought, everything is gone wrong. What shall I do? Now notice what his servant said. Notice what his servant said. Verse 31. Then his servant said to him, look now, we've heard that the kings of Israel are merciful kings. Interesting thought. Where would they have learned that from? From the history of Israel. This is the northern 10. Are merciful kings. They're kind. By the way, we're speaking relative to the world that existed then. This is all relative. I'm not saying that the kings of Israel were all nice, wonderful. You know, that would be obviously an exaggeration. They're all great, godly men. Some were better than others, but you know what I mean. They weren't all that godly. But relative to the world, I want to make a context of this. If you looked at the ancient world, actually even up to fairly modern times, and even in modern times, it depends what you look at, the world is vicious and mean. Little kingdoms would attack other kingdoms, and if they could win, they would do all kinds of things to the victims. And if you read it, things like rape the women, slice up pregnant women, I mean, it's crazy stuff, poke out people's eyes, send all the people off to horrible slavery, just horrible things were done to people. People weren't important. It's funny, I heard a guy talking about a particular kingdom in the Middle East. He said, you know, when you try to understand Iran, you got to realize the people in charge there aren't really concerned about the people. The safety of the people doesn't motivate them. The economy doesn't motivate them. The happiness of the people doesn't motivate them. Their motivation is some weird ideology, and they're going to cause the destruction of Israel and a great big war, and the 12th Mahdi will come and create Islamic paradise in their version of Islam. With them in charge, will rule the world. That's their thinking. So you're thinking about, well, they're concerned about the safety of the people, nope, none of that. Well, there's a lot of, in ancient history, it depends on the king, but a lot of viciousness existed in the world. We have no idea because I don't think they teach any reasonable history anymore. They don't know anything about anything. I mean, that's my opinion. I'll finish reading verse 31. We've heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful. Please, let us put sackcloth around our waists and ropes around our heads and go out to the kings of Israel, and perhaps he will spare your life. We had no choice. They got us surrounded. Most of our soldiers are dead because the wall collapsed. What do we have to lose? And of course, they did that. And King Ahab gave him, he was nice, and he gave him a break, which he shouldn't have done because they plotted 3 years later to go to war with him again, although they promised otherwise. It's, you can't trust what the bad guys say when they're in desperate need. And so he made a mistake trusting them. But where did they get the reputation of being kinder and more merciful than other kings? Because the influence of God and God's laws, even though they weren't keeping them correctly, we know about Jeroboam's counterfeit religion and all that, they still had that influence, and they were kinder than other nations around them. Now I'm going to move to the modern world. If you go to the modern world, this has actually happened in a number of big wars. Enemies, if they had a choice and they had to surrender, they'd rather surrender to American soldiers than soldiers of other armies, especially the Russians. You all understand that, don't you? Yes. They knew they would get fed, kind treatment, they get reasonably good treatment as American POWs. You ought to read about the POWs held by the Axis powers in World War II. Starvation, beatings, concentration camps, all the stuff that the Germans did to the Russian POWs and then the Russians did to the German POWs. It will blow your mind, the cruelty. It was like, a lot of the fighting was in Ukraine too. And half the Ukrainians fought for the Germans and half for the Russians. And the fights over there in the wintertime, it was dog eat dog in a way that most Americans can't imagine. Now, I realize that's World War II, but the point is we don't want American soldiers fighting over there, especially when winter comes. It is horrible. And even in the current Ukrainian war, I've heard of atrocities to POWs on both sides. Whether that's true or not, but it's probably true to some extent. They would not get that treatment if they were in American hands. And I know we know all this, but I'm just going to remind the people who maybe haven't heard us speak before, who see this video later. In World War II, America ended World War II, the only one with the atomic bomb, with a huge Navy and a huge Air Force that could hit any target in the world. I mean, they had these big B-29s. They could leave England or France. They could be, actually they were bombing in eastern Russia. Actually, one of the biggest air battles in World War II was deep in Russia where the big oil fields. And I forgot the names of the towns, but it'll come to me later. And that was the last source of oil the German army had. So the American Air Force kept, from England, they get escort bomb. Anyway, they would bomb it and try to knock it out, and the Germans would fix the railroads around it and try to repair it, and they would bomb it, and that was one of the biggest air battles. And of course, America won it. The point I'm making is America had the air power to reach deep into Eastern Europe. We could have dropped A-bombs on Moscow. Not that we would want to do that, don't get me wrong, but we could have. That's my point. We had the big economy. They were producing, I think it was the first year, FDR asked for like 60,000 warplanes. Places like Detroit, Chicago, and other places created 83,000 warplanes. We just overwhelmed the enemy. Well, with that much going for America at the end of the war, America was magnanimous in victory. Rebuilt Japan and Germany. Now you think about that for a minute. I guarantee you, and we only used the A-bomb on relatively small cities. The first one was the headquarters of the Japanese army, but they were small cities. We could have bombed some big cities in Japan that had millions of people. I mean, if America wanted to be mean, I guarantee you, Hitler was close to getting the A-bomb. If he had gotten the A-bomb, he would have turned London into glass. You know that, don't you? You have any doubts that that's what he would have done? And a bunch of other evil dictators would have done something similar. You ever see the stuff that Stalin did and Mao did? Like 20 million. They believe Stalin killed 20 million of his own people, not in war, although the Russians did throw men in combat like they could just waste them, but 20 million and Mao probably 40 million. Evil and cruelty has existed in the world. Relative to those nations, America and the British Empire were kinder. Now I'm saying relative. I'm not saying there aren't atrocities in American history, especially Civil War, bad things happen. So I'm not trying to, whitewash history. But relatively speaking, most of the world's charity, far and away, has come out of America. A lot of kids in college don't know that. You see these college kids running around, America's never been great. America, burn them. I mean, they're saying death to America. And they're educated in Ivy League schools. And it's all over higher education, everywhere. And it's seeping down into high schools, too. They're miseducating the kids. America, I was reading one book on slavery, and they said the slaves that went, they went to the Caribbean, they went south to places like Brazil and all those other places, and those that went north. The ones that went north were much luckier than the ones that went south. And they have all kinds of statistics to prove that. My point is America's been the kinder place to be. If you had to go somewhere, it was a kinder place to be. It's more merciful and kind than other countries. And those kings in the ancient world, they had learned that in fighting Israel. And that's why Benedict's advisor said, look, these people are merciful and kind, not like, we could name other nations, but they'll cut off your head, chop off your foot, blind your eye. Horrible things were done all the time. By the way, if you want to just get a view of world history, when the Roman Empire finally conquered that big rival Carthage, because they had a long war with them for 20-some years, naval, and it's a long story. When the Roman Empire finally got the victory, they totally destroyed Carthage. I don't mean there's a little damage here and there. I mean they killed tons of people, sent tons to work in salt mines, and they plowed soil in that whole part of North Africa so it couldn't grow crops. I mean, they ruined it. When I say they destroyed it, I mean they destroyed it. And the people they brought back for those parades in Rome, it was vicious and mean. And to some extent, North Africa has never quite recovered since then. They did the same thing in Jerusalem, too. And that's why, but it may not be the only reason. There are probably a lot of other things going on. But when you read the Bible, the Middle East is called the Holy Land, the beautiful land. Well, you look at it now, does it look that beautiful? Missouri, just in southern Illinois, look a whole lot prettier, don't they? Because when the Romans, they also plowed soil. They said you could almost, maybe not quite, you could almost walk past some cities in Judah and Jerusalem and not even know that a big city was there. Maybe, actually there were some ruins, but not much. They just destroyed everything and killed, well, you read Josephus on the siege of Jerusalem and what happened afterwards, and it'll give you nightmares. I'm not recommending you read it. The point I want to make is the world has been vicious, evil and vicious, and in all kind of places. Muslims, when they attacked Eastern Europe, so I'm not putting any one group in it, or when the Spanish conquistadors went to the New World, and that's real world history, not all this fluff, and that's real world history. The kindest and most generous nation in the world has been the United States, and maybe second, the British Empire. And there's nobody even close. What about the French and the Germans? Not even close. My opinion, not even close. Napoleon was pretty vicious too. By the way, you might wonder, why did Jefferson go for the Louisiana Purchase? When the Spanish had it, they were kind of weak and getting weaker. They weren't too big a problem because New Orleans was a key to American shipping and farm success because they put everything on the river, went to New Orleans, and that's how they made their money. But when a warlike guy like Napoleon got charge of New Orleans, America said, oh, this is not going to be a problem for us. The Spaniards, we can intimidate them pretty easily. But not the French. They were quite warlike. And of course, when they offered him the $15 million to buy Louisiana Purchase, Napoleon actually said something very wise. He said, when we had it, it was nothing but a problem and a headache. But if the Americans get it, they'll make the most out of it. He could sense America was being blessed. He actually said that God takes care of some quotes about babies and the United States of America. And he was right. God blessed America when we got the Louisiana Purchase. The point I'm making is America has been blessed and has had a more biblical influence than most countries in the world. You know, when the Puritans came here, boy, were they Bible-oriented. The word Puritan means they purely understood the Bible. You might not agree with everything they did and some of the squabbles among the different denominations when they got here, but they were very much Bible-oriented. I don't know, can you say that for most other places in the world? You start looking at history, I don't think so. Not if you're being objective. America's always had. And something I've noticed, let's say if you talk to some foreign students from different parts of the world, maybe from China, and they'll say things like, back home in China, everything's intense, and you have to be careful what you say, you'll get in trouble, and they go on. They say, you Americans are free. You're relaxed and you're free. You can say what you want. You got personal freedom. I honestly believe a lot of the people pouring into America, crossing all those deserts, dealing with the horrible drug cartels that run the border, a lot of them are not starving. You look at some of their clothing, they look like maybe lower middle class. They come to America for the freedom. I mean, sure, they want the prosperity and the money, but I think one of the big reasons they come because the world believes, and I think to some extent it's true, this is the freest place on the planet. You might, maybe there are a few exceptional islands here and there, or parts of Switzerland, but any big country, this is the freest place in the world. And in some respects, the kindness. Obviously, most nations in the world have various degrees of autocratic dictatorships based on political and or religious issues. So if they said, well, yeah, but how do you know there is a lost 10 tribes of Israel? Here's my argument. And we've talked about this in other sermons that you all who might hear this tape can look up, and the church has a booklet on it. But I would say if you look at a number of prophecies of the end time, the 10 lost tribes, look at Book of Revelation, 144,000. The 10 lost tribes are listed. There are places in the prophecy where it talks about 2 sticks, one the 10 lost tribes and one the 3 tribes of the kingdom of Judah. And they'll be put together and there'll be a unified Israel being led by Jesus Christ. And the Bible scriptures cannot be broken. So if prophecies say the 10 lost tribes will someday be part of God's great millennial kingdom and lead the world in the great millennial thing that'll happen, then it has to be true. Then the 10 lost tribes have to be here, right? Because the Bible says they're going to be there at the end. So the question is, if they have to be here, where are they? Well, you start looking around for who fits certain descriptions of it. I can't think of anything but the British Empire and the United States of America. And boy, you look at American history. This country's been blessed. You look at a map of all the territories America got and how fast they got it. It's just from George Washington's time, within 1 century, America had become the world's greatest, overwhelmingly greatest economy in the world. Give or take a few years, from islands like Guam off the coast of China, the Philippines, and on the other side of the ocean, Puerto Rico, and America was big, huge, great empire. So that, what could you say? It was like the focus of the world economy. And it's still true. I'm not saying things aren't starting to move in the wrong direction, but it's still true to this day. Something Dennis Prager said, and he's a scholar, written a number of books, and you probably heard of Prager University, and he's Jewish. He said that if you ask a Jewish person who knows what's going on, in the last 200 years, which country has been the most welcoming and friendly to the Jewish people? He says, it isn't even close. It's been the United States of America. Britain secondarily, but America primarily. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, a lot of Jewish leaders were worried that they got so much acceptance in America. Half their kids were dropping being Jewish. They just, they're marrying Americans because it didn't matter. Now, that may be changing now that anti-Semitism all of a sudden showed up on all these colleges, which have been corrupted by communists. But, well, that's not a coincidence. And America has been the kindest, most accepting place. You look at the history of the Jews, even though they succeed as middlemen and other things, their tenuous hold in the world has always been very tenuous, because every now and then some tin pot dictator would try to wipe them out or kick them out of, like in Spain, they kicked them out of Spain. And you probably have heard some of those stories, and that's why they need their own nation. But America has been the exception, the kindest place they've ever been. And no doubt, I'm saying relative to the world. I'm not saying there aren't mean, crazy people and have always been everywhere in the world, including here. But relative to the world, America has had more mercy and kindness. I would even argue the election of Barack Obama was a sign of kindness. I think, I'm giving an opinion, so you can, of course, disagree. But I think many voters thought, well, we'll send a signal to Black America that we, want things to be good, and out of kindness, we'll elect a Black president. Now, actually, Obama made race relations worse, not better, but that's what people thought. It was an act of kindness when they elected him. Now, ask yourself, would China elect a non-Chinese president? Would Germany elect a non-German president? I could rattle off, would India elect, they got some minorities over there too, would they elect a minority as their president? You get the point, don't you? America did it. Now, I'm not saying it was smart of America. That's a whole nother issue. Because I think he's a closet communist and maybe too sympathetic to Islam, the radical side of Islam. But I know those are all controversial statements. But the point is, America attempted to be kind. Also, because we know the identity of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, our church has been more accurate in understanding prophecy. And I remember over 50 years ago, people leading our church said, Britain will not remain part of United Europe. People said, Britain kind of helped. They're the core of, leadership in Europe. There's no way. And when Brexit came, it won't work. And, everybody's against Brexit. But we held our ground and said, nope, Britain will not be part of it. And sure enough, Brexit happened and Britain is out. We also said that Russia was not the beast and that the Soviet Union would fall or something would happen. We said this many, many, many years ago, and it happened. Because we have a better grasp on prophecy because I think we understand who the 10 lost tribes are and some other things. But, now here's the but. After I said all that, here's the but. Here's the but. And then you knew there was a but coming, right? But are we starting to lose that kindness? Are we starting to lose that sense of mercy? It's still true today, but I hope we haven't lost it. But I want to read Matthew 24, 12 and 13. Matthew 24, 12 and 13. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, or some translations say wax cold, like wax, as it gets colder, it hardens and hardens and hardens, like people's hearts harden and harden and harden, will grow cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. So 2 things to note in that verse. One is, in the end time, Christ saying before the end, he predicts kindness will wax cold. It's not a good thing. 2, he says true believers have to endure to the end. That means there's going to be pressure on us by corrupt media, corrupt neighbors to become harder and colder and more selfish. You remember the scripture in Timothy that Carl read. I'm not going to read it again, but you know that scripture about cold-heartedness. It's a really it's very elucidating scripture. Well, that pressure was going to be on us. And some people are speculating maybe cell phones and the internet kind of push people. Actually, cell phones push people away from each other and family members away from each other. Instead of a friend that you can reach out and touch, you're talking to people on the phone, and in a way it makes you colder. And this cancel culture, I think Carl mentioned that too. But isn't that the same? It's kind of a coldness. We're going to cancel you. Instead of mercy, you cross the political red line of political correctness. Cancel you, destroy your career forever, like they did poor Roseanne. And I got to talk about her, but I think she got a raw deal. But I won't get into that now. But they want us to become harder and colder, harder and colder. So as we wrap this message up, I want to just say we have to resist the things that make us harder and colder. Joining us every Sabbath certainly helps a little bit of that warmth and friendship. And hopefully we'll do it at other times as well. But try to be a nice family member, a nice church member. Keep our hearts warm and friendly. And here's a stupid crime story. Remember when you're thinking about robbing a bank because you want to pay for your food and rent? Well, if you attempt it, one thing is for sure, whether you get caught or not, your rent and food will be taken care of for 7 to 10 years. Yeah, either you'll get the money or you'll go to prison and they'll take care of you. Well, what about political criminals? A lot of historians list the Nazis not just as far left politicians. They were political criminals. You look at all the things they did, even to some people that helped them get to power. Hitler had the top 100 officers of the SA, and some of the groups that did the brown shirts that fought on the streets of Germany to fight with the communists and others to help his party. Top 100 leaders, including Ernst Röhm, he had them executed, stabbed people in the back for his own deals with the army. The point I'm making is they were political criminals. They did horrible things when they got to power to those people in the press that really covered them honestly. So there was no more honest coverage of the Nazi Party when they came to control. They had people in German bars spying on each other, see if anybody's saying anything against the Nazis. If so, they got disappeared in the middle of the night off to some concentration camps. Ever since the 1960s, Chicago 7, which is 67, 68, we've had people taking over. They call them the new communists. It's kind of a new American version of that autocracy. They're cruel, and they've been slowly taking over higher education and other things like the media. And now they've had people unfairly put in jail. I heard a guy on the radio talking about political criminals inside America. Now, we're not talking about other countries where that's normal, but inside America. He says people have been put in prison for praying at abortion clinics. I'm not making that up. He's like, oh, he's kidding. People have been put in jail and being investigated in Hassel for speaking up at school board meetings because they didn't like drag queen hour or pornography in libraries for little kids. I'm not talking about for adults who want to think about it. I mean, a reporter who told what he thought was the truth about J6, he's now, they had him do the perp walk a month ago. He works for Glenn Beck. Well, he's on his way to jail. Oh, they'll be trumped up and they'll get a radical judge. By the way, one thing that Stalin said, show me the man, a political rival, and I will show you the crime. And you can see pictures of both the Nazis and the communists. They had judges screaming at people who were frightened because they'd been worked over and intimidated the night before and their families threatened. And political opponents were often sent to Siberia or killed, or in Germany's case, to concentration camps. In other words, the justice system was corrupted to be a hammer to smash political enemies. Are we seeing that in America? Is there a J6 gulag in D.C. where people have spent 3 years in prison, solitary confinement to some extent, waiting for a trial, and then they'll have more sentence if they, with judges and lawyers that are against them. And like in the case of the Nazis, they put religious minorities like Jehovah's Witnesses and Jews in jail. A lot of people in Germany say, well, they're not after me, what do I have to worry about? But later when they crossed the Nazi party, about 500,000 Germans ended up in concentration camps. And they were afraid to speak out. Or the Stasi in East Germany. You've heard about, this one lady said she went to East Germany, East Berlin, to a restaurant, and all she could hear were forks. Everybody was afraid to talk what they really thought because they had people spying on each other. They all knew that communism was bad, and they wished they could go to West Berlin and get out, get through the Iron Curtain. But if they were caught saying the wrong thing, you go end up some prison camp. Everybody's afraid to talk. Comedians in America are afraid to tell jokes that hit the truth too much because they'll get their careers canceled. Americans are afraid to talk. And you think, well, it'll never get that bad in America like it was in all those other autocratic countries. I hope that's true. But look at Canada. You see the trends in Canada, don't you? They put pastors in jail for preaching certain Bible verses. And they're starting to do things in Congress now that could pave the way for that in America. Just something to think about. So, as I come to a conclusion, pray for America. Pray for the J6 prisoners, that we can empty out the D.C. gulag. Resist sinful influences. So for us, there are 3 things I want to end up by saying. 1, we have some correct prophecy keys, and it's showing, like the Brexit prediction. That's a good thing. 2, pray for America that we can keep the kindness that's been, relative kindness, that's been the mark of America. Because I've had some problems with people, but wouldn't most of you admit that most people you've dealt with, there are some criminal types, but most people you deal with in America have been reasonably kind and helpful if you're really honest about your life as a whole, right? We've been blessed. We have been. Number 3, be thankful that you're born here. Pray that we can keep being merciful and kind and